Hello, I'm Dr. Nancy Silva, board certified pediatrician, and today we're going to be talking about measles outbreaks in 2025 and what every parent needs to know now. Stay with me till the end because it's a long video, but there's a lot of great information. And towards the end is when I'm really going to discuss what to do if you are exposed to measles this year. So we're going to be covering what is measles, how contagious is measles, the outbreaks that are happening in 2025 in the United States, measles in Florida, that just happened the other day. What is the impact of the measles vaccine? And why are there measles outbreaks if we have a vaccine? Also, we're going to be discussing symptoms that happen early with measles or later with measles, who's at the greatest risk for getting measles, and common measles complications, whether they're mild or severe, about prevention, the effectiveness of the vaccine, who should get it, who should not get it, and then, like I said, what to do if you are exposed to the measles. So let's get started. What is measles? Measles is a highly contagious viral infection, and it spreads by breathing, by coughing, or sneezing. How contagious is measles? Measles is highly contagious, very contagious in fact. It stays in the air where a person who had measles for 2 hours. So if you've gone to that area where the person had measles, guess what? You've been exposed. And symptoms can take 7 to 21 days to appear. That means if you're pregnant, if you're unvaccinated, if you're undervaccinated, if you are immunocompromised, then you need to consult with your doctor and know what are the symptoms to watch for and what can you do in terms of any preventative care. This video will have updates up until February 28th, 2025. There are 164 cases of the measles in the United States. 20% of those have been hospitalized, and there's been one unvaccinated child, unfortunately, that died in Texas. The last measles death we've had in the United States was approximately 10 years ago. So this comes pretty hard. Now, to put it in perspective, what's 164? What is that number? How common is it? Is it typical? Is it usual? It is not usual. Last year, we did have measles in the United States. We had some outbreaks. There were a total of 285 cases. Well, if you do the math, that means we've had 57% of all 12 months of last year's cases within less than the first 2 months of this year. So not usual, not typical. There are 10 states that are having measles cases thus far in 2025. Those 10 are Alaska, California, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Rhode Island, and Texas. The one case of the measles that has occurred thus far in Florida was on March 6, 2025. It was a teenager that goes to Miami Palmetto Senior High School. The good news is that school has a high vaccination rate of 99.7%. So it makes it much less likely that another child will contract it, and no other child thus far at that school has gotten the measles. I'm going to go back a little bit. Before the United States had a measles vaccination program in 1963 and go over with you exactly how bad measles was back in the day. Before the measles vaccine program in 1963, the impact of measles was horrific. There were 500,000 cases of measles a year. There were 48,000 hospitalizations due to measles each year. There were 1,000 cases of encephalitis due to measles each year. Encephalitis is brain swelling, which will lead to brain damage. What type of brain damage? You can talk about developmental delays, you can talk about blindness, you can talk about deafness, and a lot more. What else happened? 400 to 500 deaths due to measles each year. So we developed this vaccine program. We had a high vaccination rate. Next question is, why are we having measles outbreaks if the vaccine program was effective? The vaccine program was highly effective. In the year 2000, the United States declared measles eliminated in the United States. What does that mean? That means there was no continuous spread of the measles disease for more than 12 months. So happy day, great times. Unfortunately, what happened? Well, the anti-vaccine movement kicked in, and to really seal the deal, we had a pandemic for COVID-19. And what that did was it lowered measles vaccination rates even more. You need about 95% protection, 95% herd immunity rather, in order to be considered relatively safe that you're probably not going to be getting a disease, an infectious communicable disease such as the measles. And unfortunately, in the year 2023 to 2024, in the 2023 to 24 season, measles vaccination rate decreased down to 92.7% in kindergartners across the board in the United States. So what happens is illness spreads more easily in communities that have unvaccinated people. And in Gaines County, Texas, that's where measles found a home. There was the start of the outbreak this year, and their kindergartners have an 82% vaccination rate. So if you're in that community and you have low vaccination rates, it's more likely to spread. Now to get to the nitty gritty. When do symptoms start with the measles? If you've been exposed, when do you expect to see symptoms? Symptoms can occur anywhere from 7 to 21. I should say 21. Can't do this well on camera. To 21 days after the start of the illness. So once again, symptoms begin anywhere from 7 to 21 days after exposure to someone with the illness. And what are the symptoms? Well, there's early symptoms and then there's later symptoms. The early symptoms include a high fever, and that can easily be a 104. Most commonly, it's a very high fever. Cough, runny nose, red watery eyes, like really red. And there's also something called Koplik spots. So the insides of the cheeks will have white dots. And that happens within the first 4 days of the illness. So later symptoms tend to happen about 3 to 5 days after the illness starts. So you'll still have those first symptoms, and then they start adding on afterwards. And that is typically a rash. So it starts on the face and on the neck, and that's usually in the first 3 days or so. Then it starts spreading over to the lower body and keeps on descending over the next 3 days. And then eventually it fades after about 5 to 7 days. So who's at greatest risk for contracting the measles disease? Children less than 5 years old, adults greater than 20 years old. Keep in mind, there are quite a few teenagers in Texas right now that have also gotten the measles. We're just talking about who has the greatest risk. So it's children less than 5 years old, adults greater than 20 years old, pregnant women, and those people who have conditions that leave them with a weakened immune system, such as HIV, such as AIDS, such as lupus, such as severe diabetes, such as a whole list of immunodeficiencies that you might have lower immunoglobulins and you just can't defend yourself the same way. Also very important, people who are getting cancer treatments, so radiation and chemotherapy. If you're on high-dose steroids for multiple treatments, if you've had a transplant and you're on high-dose steroids. So it's a long list of who can be at greatest risk. Took a little break. I have my little pony cup, and I have my flavored water drink so I can keep on talking. Next question is, what are some common complications? Well, there's some mild complications and there's severe complications. So what are some common complications? Commonly, 1 in 10 children have ear infections when they've been diagnosed with measles. Also commonly, 1 in 10 people, not just children, have diarrhea when they have measles, and this can lead to severe hydration. Severe complications are hospitalization. 1 in 5 unvaccinated people end up hospitalized due to the measles. Pneumonia, that's a big one, because that is the most common cause of death with measles for children. 1 in 20 children will develop pneumonia with measles. Encephalitis, not as common, but common enough. 1 in every 1,000 children will develop encephalitis when they have the measles. And again, encephalitis, brain swelling, brain damage. You can have blindness, deafness, intellectual disabilities as a result. It really does a number on your brain. The other thing is death. So again, less common. We did have 1 death this year. A child that died, an unvaccinated child in Texas, died from the measles. Now, many people say, well, it was just 1. If it was your one, it would be the whole world is over. So 1 to 3 out of every 1,000 children who end up having measles die from it. There is another much more rare complication from the measles, but it's devastating. It's called subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. So now you're looking at brain swelling throughout your whole brain. And what is it? It is a prolonged measles infection that affects your brain. Only about 2 in 100,000 cases have it. But guess what? Why is it devastating? It happens about 7 to 10 years after the initial measles infection. it always ends up in brain damage and always ends up in death. So if you ever get subacute sclerosing panencephalitis from the measles, or your child does, or anyone you know, it's a death sentence, and it's beyond tragic. Most important question is, how do I prevent getting the measles? It's really simple. Get vaccinated. CDC recommends a series of 2 vaccines. The first dose should be between 12 to 15 months old, and the second dose should be between 4 and 6 years old. So basically, by the time your child is ready to enter school, they're fully vaccinated. In the case of Miami, that's really helping that school out. That's helping a lot of parents sleep better at night. They actually have a 99.7% vaccination rate. That helps. It's herd immunity. How effective is the measles vaccine? After just 1 dose, you're considered 93% protected. After the second dose, you're considered 97% protected. So it's a very effective vaccine. It is safe. There is no vaccine nor anything in the world that I could tell you is 100% safe, doesn't have any side effects, couldn't have a problem. You could be allergic to a component of it and then you can't get the vaccine. This is just to let you know that if you get that vaccine, it's considered safe, effective, and lifelong in duration of its protection. Is there anyone who should not get the measles vaccine? That's so important. The answer is yes. There is a subpopulation that absolutely should not get the measles vaccine. The measles vaccine, which is a part of the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, is considered a live vaccine. And as a result, if you're pregnant, you should not be getting it. If you have a weakened immune system, meaning you're immunocompromised, you should not be getting it. Who is considered with a weakened immune system and immunocompromised? Cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy or radiation, for example. If you had a transplant and you are on high-dose steroids, you have a weakened immune system. And as I said, if you're pregnant also, you should not be getting it. So that's something you have to discuss with your doctor. And there are some really good real-life examples. Personally, we had a father that I had examined that he had a transplant, and he needed to know, could he or could he not be around his child who needed to have the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. So we discussed that. Another situation was, there was a grandmother, as presented to me by the mother. There was a grandmother who was dying, and she was getting chemotherapy. And it was, can we put this off for like a month or 2? Because I don't think she's going to make it that long. And I want my baby to be around my mother before she dies. Well, there's exceptions to every rule. And as long as you understand the risks, and if there's any exposure, you call me, we know what to do, we can work with that. But there's very specific cases, situations, and your doctor is best suited to help you figure out what to do next. Because we care. It's just there's a schedule because it's been tested and the effectiveness works. Is it safe to travel? For the most part, it's very safe to travel. You just need to know where those outbreaks are occurring, and you want to try to avoid those areas. Most of the time, it's a big country, frankly, and not everybody is going to the areas that were affected. Let's say you or your child are unvaccinated. Let's say you happen to be in Miami and you happen to be exposed to someone who knew that child, who went to that school, who was unvaccinated and was diagnosed with the measles. Well, you've been exposed. It doesn't have to be the direct exposure. You don't have to be directly exposed to that one person who had the disease. You could have been connecting with their family member or their friend. So what do? The first thing I'm going to tell you to do is call your doctor. You need to verify you and your child's vaccination status. If you've received 2 vaccines of the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, which protects against measles, then chances are you're fine. Now, I say chances are because I don't know your medical history, and your doctor does, and your doctor will be able to guide you very well. The other reason to call your doctor is that every case is unique. There are different situations where you could not have been vaccinated. Perhaps you are immunocompromised. Perhaps your child is a year old. Perhaps your child is under a year old. So those are situations you really need to discuss. But using an example, if you have a 1-year-old who received the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, you just find out there was an exposure, what do? Well, live vaccines need to be given 28 days apart. So if that 1-year-old is actually 1-year-old and 28 days plus, we would give them another vaccine, assuming everything else is normal with the medical history. What about, I have a 7-month-old. It was an exposure. What do? They're not old enough to get the vaccine yet. Oh, yes, they are. So that's another exception to the rule. It's not too young to give them a vaccine if they have been exposed and they're not quite a year yet. Under, like 6 months and under, 6 months is like the the fence, because below 6 months old, we typically say that our babies have gotten our protection from mothers. I have had the MMR vaccine. I actually had it 3 times, but I've had the MMR vaccine. So my baby is going to have some of my antibodies from the measles, mumps, rubella infections in their body. Typically, it wanes at about 6 months old. So that's why I was mentioning the 7-month-old example. And also, if that 7-month-old gets a vaccine, doesn't mean they're not going to get it again at a year old, because it's only so effective under a year of age. But if you've been exposed, we need some protection. So my personal story was, apparently there was a lot of measles cases in the 80s. Started having a big breakout, and it was like 50,000. So they wanted to know, what can we do? Well, the country came up with the Vaccines for Children program. I was not aware of all this, and I went to college, and they said, oh, your second shot was given at less than a year. You need a third shot. It's like, a third shot? Why do I need a third shot? But oh well, I followed those rules because I want to be protected. I went to my pediatrician and got the shot. He tried to tell me, oh, it's not going to hurt. And I said, yeah, it's going to hurt. He said, no, it's really not going to hurt. And I said, listen, I've never kicked you once. I never screamed. I never cried, but it is going to hurt. So he gave me my third vaccine, and he said, now, did that hurt? And I said, yes, it did hurt. I mean, I handled it. It wasn't excruciatingly horrible. But my point is, I got vaccinated, even when I was already in my 20s, because it was to protect me. I did not know that this Vaccines for Children program came about, and that's why they were scrutinizing everything, because of this huge amount of measles outbreak. But the Vaccines for Children program showed that, well, the evaluation showed that children weren't getting vaccinated because they didn't have insurance, and the parents couldn't afford to pay for the vaccines. So that's when the government stepped in and said, we need to prevent disease across the board. So they formed the Vaccines for Children program. And when people don't have insurance, or they have insurance that doesn't cover the vaccines, underinsured, then the government steps in and we can vaccinate the children. So please stay safe. Most of the times you're going to be fine. Get fully vaccinated if you aren't already. If you have any questions, call your doctor. We love to talk to you and answer those questions and reassure you, because that's what we're doing this for. So until the next time, please let me know what you liked about this. Let me know what more you'd like to hear from me. Subscribe. Have a good one. Stay safe. Bye-bye.